Hey, I'm Sarah Baxley and welcome to Pinkie the Bear. This is my mystics, metaphysics, and mindfulness channel, and I'm here today with your astrology forecast for the month of January 2019. So the three upcoming themes for this month are 1. Sudden shifts, 2. Lingering fog, and 3. Red light, green light. All right, so so January is definitely one of the more intense months of the year. Let's just put it lightly. If you find yourself partway through this month and you're like, what the is going on? Just know that, things will sort of subside a little bit, right? January definitely is one of the more intense months of the year. There's 2 eclipses in January, in addition to like numerous other aspects. So I'm going to kind of like break that down a little bit. So let's hop into the first theme, which is sudden shifts. So the first theme, sudden shifts, it has to do specifically with the eclipses that we have going on. There's an eclipse that's on January 5th, a solar eclipse, and then there's a lunar eclipse that's on January 20th. Now, solar eclipses tend to signify new chapters or new beginnings, right? It's like a new sort of chapter that leads the beginning of like the next like 6-month long chapter, right? But just things kind of tend to be a little bit more intensified around both solar and lunar eclipses. So I would definitely, even though the eclipse is on the 5th, I would definitely keep an eye out about 3 days before and 3 days after. Just, there could be a lot of shifts and a lot of things that happen. And, then the other one we have is we have a lunar eclipse that's on January 20th. Now, lunar eclipses are more relational and they signify more of like endings. Like it's like an ending to a particular chapter in our lives, or like sort of like letting go. Oftentimes they can be like relationship oriented, or like having to do with like more interpersonal types of themes, right? And that's going to be around the 20th. And again, same thing, can be kind of like intense about 3 days before and 3 days after. So the January 5th and January 20th are definitely 2 days that I would jot down just to kind of keep in mind, like for these eclipses. And for those of you that have the calendars, you can follow along in there. I'll probably post another video for people who have the calendars who are asking questions and stuff too, so stay tuned. Sorry, that's a little side note. But the media really has a tendency of, as it always does, but it has a tendency to like sort of sensationalize everything. And, so like you'll find like around, the lunar eclipse, they'll be like, the blood moon, crazy, and they use like all of these like adjectives to really put people in fear and everything else. And it's really unnecessary, but it is definitely, eclipse times definitely are a little bit more intensified times of the year because effects of eclipses can last for a long time. So often there will be events and things that happen around the time of an eclipse, and then sort of the effects of that can last 6 months, even up to a year. Some astrologers look at longer, but in my practice, I just feel like 6 months to a year is kind of like the tight window to see a lot of those shifts happen and change. So, so there's already going to be a lot of dynamicism. Is that even a word? It's going to be very dynamic, right? Throughout this month, and having both the solar eclipse and lunar eclipse around those times. So just expect, I put sudden shifts as the first theme, but just expect that there's going to be kind of, there's going to be a lot of different sort of maybe unexpected things kind of like coming around, and maybe certain things either working themselves into your life or working themselves out of your life. So just definitely something to keep in mind. Now the theme number 2, I have lingering fog. And, there's 3 separate times this year. We have a Jupiter-Neptune square that goes on in the month of January. We have it a couple other times this year, and this is a really big thing because this aspect, and this is something that everyone is going through, like as a collective, right, is that it has a tendency, because Jupiter is like the planet of like expansion and abundance, and all of that stuff, and it's making a 90-degree angle to Neptune, and Neptune's sole job is to blur boundaries, right? So it's almost like this like expansiveness of like blurred boundaries, right, where we just don't things can get blown out of proportion really easily. And with the energy of the eclipse that we already had this month, I just want for you to keep that in mind, because things can either have a tendency to appear a lot worse than they are this month, or they can also have a tendency to appear a lot better than they actually are, like this month. So definitely keep an eye out and be careful of like any type of like grandiose like gestures or like major commitments and like other kinds of stuff this month, because there's just sort of this like overall haze that happens. I mean, essentially all of 2019, honestly, like one of the major themes is that we're kind of in this lingering fog. So keep that in mind, but there are certain months and certain times that it's more intense, and January is definitely one of them, and the eclipses certainly don't help the situation. And then hopping into the third theme of the month, which is red light, green light. And that is, you know, red light, green light is something that I always like to use as a term whenever because the astrology that I do, I try to take, you know, all of this information that I see and break it down to where it's really tangible and digestible for, you know, people that maybe you're not as familiar with astrology, because it can be really complex. So I try to kind of think of little things, and I tend to use a lot of idioms and just little things to make it, you know, just more easily digestible, right? And so I put red light, green light, and I always tend to refer to this whenever I see, whether or not it's like a client and this is something that's in their chart, or whether or not this is an aspect that we're going through, which is in this particular case. But red light, green light, I refer to Mars-Saturn squares. So Mars is, and squares again are 90-degree angles. So Mars is like the planet that like wants to take action. It wants to like drive, it wants to move forward. And, you know, this month it's in the sign of Aries, which is a really natural place for Mars to be. It's like, yeah, let's do this. Let's plunge forward. Let's go, go, go. You know, but keep in mind we have the eclipses. So there's like all this shit hitting the fan. And then there's like lingering fog from the Jupiter-Neptune square. So we're like, okay, so, you know, so we're sort of like plunging forward full speed this month. And then Saturn is the planet of like rules, restrictions, and boundaries. So you have Mars wanting to move forward and Saturn wanting to like pull back. And the thing is that, you know, Saturn, you know, Saturn's sole job is to establish boundaries. So I always put, whenever I think of those terms, I always say red light, green light, because it can feel really frustrating. Like Mars was wanting to move forward and Saturn is like, not so fast. Like that might not work for the long term. So anyway, so I call the Mars-Saturn squares, and we have them red light, green light, because they can just feel so frustrating. It can just feel like you're wanting to make progress, you're wanting to move forward, but there's just these restrictions that keep sort of like standing in your way. And, you know, so again, just as like a quick recap, so like the three themes that we covered was sudden shifts, lingering fog, and red light, green light. And, you know, so just January, there's just going to be so much stuff going on, so many different shifts and changes happening. There's going to be kind of like this fog around things, and maybe things seem either better or worse than they actually are. And, you know, there's also going to be sort of this energy more towards the end of the month, because I think that this is on like the 21st. Yeah, 21st of the red light, green light, right? With the Mars-Saturn square, is that it's like, you know, it's almost like there's kind of something that's still restraining us and still holding us back, even though we're wanting to plunge forward. And that can feel a little bit frustrating, but, you know, maybe just try to be mindful of it as it's occurring, and just kind of try to kind of really own it and like really step into it and just be like, okay, like there's seasons in life where like things are, you know, awesome and moving right along. And then there's seasons in life where things can feel a little bit frustrating, and where things can kind of, you know, where we can kind of feel like we're held back a little bit more than we'd like to. So just keep that in mind. And all in all, you know, as always, you know, this whole year we have North Node in Cancer. So really honoring your emotions and your feelings and your self-care routine and all of that stuff is really, really, really important this year. So, you know, so through all of the, you know, chaos or, you know, whatever things that might transpire for you in your life this month, or in the world at large this month, just make sure that you're always giving yourself, you know, sort of like the love and compassion and self-care that you need, and honoring your emotions and really where you're at. Because, you know, a lot of times when things happen, it's easy to get caught up, but it's equally as important for us to kind of just get back into ourselves and really give back and nurture ourselves, because then we have, you know, more to give and we can kind of think clearly and act clearly. So anyway, that's everything for this month, and I will, yeah, thanks for tuning in. And if you have any questions, comments, I know this is the first month that I'm doing the monthly video, so just, yeah, let me know any questions and stuff that you have below. So I'll see you around. Cheers.